Thank you for joining our live event where the topic is DevOps versus org management. And the question is, which one do you need? Our event is led by two experts in the area of DevOps and org management. We have Vernon Keenan to discuss DevOps. Vernon has been part of the Salesforce ecosystem since 1999 and is currently a senior information technology industry analyst. And also joining us to discuss org management is Bill Appleton. Bill has been part of the ecosystem for 20 years now, and in fact, one of the first app builders on the Salesforce App Exchange. He's an expert in authoring tools, API services, and smart client applications, and he is currently the CTO at Metazoa. So let me bring you guys in. Thanks for joining today. Nice to see you both. Let me just say really quick how this is going to go today. I'm going to leave, so no moderation on my part. You guys can talk. If there's questions, people can enter the questions wherever they're joining from, and I will try to pull them on the screen and we'll try to get to them. And really quick, if you registered for this event, you will get the recording sent to you, or you can find it in a couple of days on the Metazoa YouTube channel. So, you guys, take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot for coming by.
I'm so happy to be here today from sunny Oakland, California.
Nice. I'm broadcasting from the worldwide Metazoa headquarters.
Well, where's that, Bill?
It's just our office in Los Gatos. It's a cool office, though. We've been here for a couple of years, and the building itself has been here since the 1850s.
Oh, kind of like you and me.
Yeah, we're old timers. I'll give you that, Vernon. But we have the most up-to-date information about DevOps and org management. So should be a good debate.
Okay, well, that's good. And I think hopefully we can find some areas to have some lively disagreement on, but I think that we're going to be able to convey some good information to the listeners today, no matter which camp you feel you're falling into. But you guys talk a lot about the need for org management and that there's a difference between org management and DevOps. So why don't you kind of go into that and set some groundwork for that?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about a big enterprise org, they might have some developers building applications, creating custom objects. They might have created hundreds of custom objects. But, don't forget, there'll be over 1,000 standard objects in that org already that are there for the Salesforce platform and for, to manage the Salesforce product line. So you could look at objects, but look at metadata types. DevOps uses a couple dozen metadata types, or the usual suspects, Apex classes and that stuff. But yet there's over 200 other metadata types that are there to implement the Salesforce platform and the Salesforce product line. So DevOps isn't the only thing going on in the org. And the way I see it is DevOps is like the icing on the cake. Org management is all about the cake. And that's what our product line is all about, keeping that org healthy and running properly.
So I think where we seem to be going is that you're talking about how to operate a Salesforce org using Metazoa, your tool, and all the cool stuff it does is a focused, dedicated function where maybe if I'm talking about all the highfalutin things that go along with DevOps, like value stream and all that kind of stuff, that's more on the development side. Is that kind of?
I think so. Maybe you can kind of divide it up where it's more about developers for DevOps and more about administrators for org management. There's a lot of shades of gray there. If you look at the things that we focus on for org health, one big one is documentation, for compliance and governance, to provide, visibility into the complexity of the org. Another thing we focus on is security, permission, optimization, user access management,
Hmm.
profiles, permission sets, permission set groups. Another thing we focus on is inactive users that are still connected to your org. How do you clean that up? And probably the biggest single focus is optimization and cleanup, technical debt detection and removal. And that's really a centerpiece that it's all kind of related, but technical debt is really a big part of it. And I think what's happened, people started out adding more and more things to their Salesforce org, and over time they added more and more, and then they added so many business requirements, and then now it's time to start thinking about cleanup, about removing the old stuff while you add the new stuff, and moving through time with those two things kind of together.
I guess what you're talking about there is a phenomenon I've heard about. Maybe you've heard about this with your customers too, but a lot of people who, let's say, they've been using Salesforce all the way back to like 2012 or something, they have orgs that are so tied up in complexity and unused features and dead code and stuff, that they need to like redo it into a whole new org. Is that something you've seen out there a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. So, technical debt is really an existential crisis potentially for the Salesforce platform. It just has to be addressed. And a lot of times when customers come to us, their orgs are kind of dead in the water, as you described. They can't transition to Lightning. They're not using new Salesforce products. They've lost the agility, and they're worried about their investment. And those are the people we can really do some things to help. Um, and I think what kind of the nuclear option when you get to the end of the road, what you're talking about there is this potential to do org splits and merges, where the service team and the sales team have been sharing the same org, and there's a lot of stepping on each other's toes, and they're not sure how to move forward. And then you can take that single org, divide it into two orgs, and so that's another thing that we're very actively involved in. We have a pretty darn complete tool set for org splits and merges, and I think that's kind of the end of the road there.
Yeah, I see when I talk about DevOps and I'm talking about um, moving code through an organization, um, we don't think about that. We're not thinking about the all the stuff that's being left behind. We're always just thinking about the new stuff, honestly. So I think, we're thinking about how to do the business analysis, how to do the how to take all of the information together and put it into a cogent plan for how to bring teams of people together to do new things. But I think there are an awful lot of customers who would hear what I say about DevOps and things that is important for folks to know if they want to advance their org. They look at me and go, "Oh, I could never do that because my org is so screwed up."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you lose that agility, that's really kind of the beginning of the end for a lot of development. And my research has shown that companies that that are actively developing in their org usually have a lot lower technical debt. And the companies that have a lot of technical debt are kind of stopped moving forward with their Salesforce investment. And
Do you find,
one thing I like about, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna, I mean, one thing I wonder is do you find that folks are like creating new technical debt today and they don't even know it? Meaning that they're creating something that nobody's going to use?
Yeah, I think it happens for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is administrative turnover is a big issue. A lot of times administrators will inherit a new org, and they'll say, we don't know what's in here. We don't know what all the workflows are doing and everything like that. And so definitely there's that, that company where everybody's an admin and everybody's got their own custom objects and they're customizing all kinds of stuff and it's all happening simultaneously. One thing I like about DevOps a lot is I think it really encourages package development. And package development is kind of the silver bullet that can really help you moving forward to avoid technical debt. Because even if it's, maybe ill-conceived what you've done, or, there's some problems with this, at least it's in a package. And, at least you can kind of, take account of it. If it's all just unpackaged assets, that vast sea of unpackaged assets, that's where the complexity kicks in, and it's really hard to get visibility.
So, and then just to follow up on that a little bit, that's actually something that some of the SIs and some users are doing, right? In terms of creating packages and doing that, like creating a new org that's completely package oriented, is actually a beautiful thing. I've seen that. It resembles the way that I would, somebody would build a complicated Go or a C or JavaScript type program, more so than in Salesforce, which is kind of like a free for all. And I don't see, it's actually interesting that you say that. And I think that it is actually a good idea for folks to think about second generation packaging as a way to containerize their development activities. But that's actually not what the DevOps platform companies are telling you to do. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a focus for Salesforce DX, right? I mean, that second generation packaging, and then Scratch orgs are really all about this ability to unit test your package. So it all makes a lot of sense. But I agree that the adoption could be a little bigger. It's definitely something we're recommending to customers.
Let's get back to one of the major challenges of Salesforce, and I think maybe we could talk a little bit about what Metazoa is doing in this area to kind of address this. And there's this thing out there called the dependency API that lets you look at objects within Salesforce and kind of see which things are referential to it. But that thing is kind of like a joke a little bit because it doesn't cover enough metadata types, and it's not thorough enough to do that, to understand it. So I think, and there's just a lot of details and a lot of data involved in understanding the complexities of all the Salesforce metadata. So I was looking at your Medium post on about the future architecture or your architectural roadmap for Metazoa, and I was really intrigued to see near the top there you've got this thing called a virtualization layer. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think the fact that you had to build that thing illustrates some of the complexities that people are dealing with at the operational level with Salesforce.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look at the data, the metadata, and the tooling API, they're highly inconsistent. It's kind of like the blind men and the elephant. And there's a ton of special cases in there, especially the metadata API. There's 220 metadata types. About half of those are some kind of, require some kind of special handling. And so we've really straightened a lot of that out, at least in the interior architecture of our product, and augmented what Salesforce does with additional research and information. So the dependency API is a good example of it. It covers about 80 metadata types and about 70 or 80 different relationships between them. Well, there's a total of 220 total metadata types, and the actual number of relationships is over 1,200. So the dependency API is not very helpful, and actually accurate dependency information is utterly key to successful deployment, to technical debt reduction, to org splits and mergers, and to impact analysis. So, I want to delete this field, I want to delete this object. What's going to happen if I do that? And so that having that accurate information at the API level is really key. And it's something we've been working on for years.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the competitive aspects between all the platform vendors as well as yourself is that there is a secret sauce aspect to all of these products to figure out the dependencies and to actually get at some of the metadata that seems to be hidden within the system, and not to mention ancillary data and setup data and there's all kinds of things. I mean, it's the metadata. I mean, this is why Salesforce DevOps, in my view, exists is because we got to manage all this metadata. People are so focused on this release management aspect of Salesforce that it's needed a lot of work, and this is why we have all those products plus Metazoa, which doesn't identify as DevOps. But I think that folks are using it in that context. Maybe that's one of the things we don't agree on. And so I think though, you talk about Bill, you talk about org health and management as being a big issue. Is there? Can you be more specific if we haven't already threshed that topic?
Yeah, I think it's just all the things that can go wrong with the underlying platform. And if the underlying platform isn't healthy, then all the DevOps in the world isn't going to matter, because you've got real troubles with recalculating sharing rules and role hierarchies, and things like that are just going haywire. Um, and
So you're talking about the way that I implemented this SaaS system, right? And not the underlying platform itself.
Well, it is kind of the underlying platform in that it's objects like profiles and roles and queues and sharing rules and opportunity line items and things like that that have a lot of complexity there and can be misconfigured and misused, and then they cause a lot of agility problems for the rest of the platform. So, and inactive, most orgs have more inactive users than active users. Well, inactive users can be connected to the org in 50 different ways, and they cause all kinds of problems. And so, one of our systems goes through, shows you all those inactive users, shows you what they're connected to, and then lets you clean it all up. So, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. It is. Here's a weird fact. Most of the problems we deal with go back to the early days of Salesforce. It's the stuff that was written 2005, 2006, before they even probably knew it was going to be a platform. If you look at data migration, the most problematic objects are the oldest objects on the platform. They have all the wacky special rules and server magic behind the scenes. They're super hard to migrate. All the modern stuff, all the custom objects and all the new stuff, that's easy.
That's cool. So, I mean, that's cool that you've got technology essentially that you guys have built to handle all those weird cases, kind of with logic encoded in your application. And now, this idea that you've been developing has also kind of evolved into something you call administrative deployment versus DevOps deployments. What do you mean by that? Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So DevOps is great. I think the best thing about DevOps is code merge. If you have a bunch of developers who are building applications and writing code, it's a really big problem to merge all of their efforts into a single deliverable. And it's something that's, I'm very familiar with. I write a lot of code. And even if you're writing a solo on a product, you need code merge to keep track of the new changes you've made for every new release and things like that. But there's a lot of other things you might want to do deployment for. Technical debt cleanup is a good example. Org splits and merges, transitions to Lightning, any large scale re-architecture of an org. And it's very painful to do those things with DevOps tools. Going through Git is a whole extra step that's kind of pointless. Really, what you're doing instead is you're hammering that destination org and re-architecting it. And so, just for example, if you're in org management, you're going to make lots of deployments. Lots of them are likely to fail because you're searching for the right recipe to get your deployment through. In DevOps, if you're getting failures, you've got to stop the machine and go fix it. You know, in org management, you're working with all the data types usually, or a huge number of them. DevOps is more about a limited scope for the application building usually. And then, so you look at org management deployments. What are they good for? They're good for re-architecting that org, technical debt removal, org splits and merges, transitions to Lightning, anything where you're hammering that destination org, trying to make some changes. I would throw release management in there. There's a lot of people that use DevOps tooling for release management. I'm not sure that's the best use of it.
Well, they do. I think to their credit, if they have an accurate metadata model, if one of the platform's service providers have got an accurate metadata model and of the stuff that we care about in terms of branch-based development and other things, which I think are what you're referring to here for code merge, I think that they do have the ability to pre-deploy, and that we can deploy frequently without an error because it's been like pre-deployed within the model of the DevOps service provider. So I think it does require a lot of discipline to achieve a smooth branch-based development strategy using Git and using a source code repository system. We should talk about more about that later. I have strong opinions. And the I think though there's a lot of I'm not so big on this distinction you're trying to make between administrative deployments and DevOps deployments. I think that release management is the key function that people who are looking at DevOps really want to solve. I think that almost always it's some sort of way to do our release management better is why some people feel like they're forced into looking at some of the higher end DevOps products because they feel stuck, and the marketing messages to them have been that you need DevOps to unstuck yourself. And I could see your point here, Bill, that they are also focused on release management, but somehow they've been sold this DevOps comprehensive thing as the way to do it. But perhaps the way that they should be looking at their real Salesforce problems is more on the operational side. Now, Metazoa is used by customers who use one of the platform companies, and I'll list all 7 of them here just so I'm fair. So that's AutoRabbit and Blue Canvas and Capado and Flowsome and GearSet and Prodly and Opsera. So, I mean, you've got customers who use all those products, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's not a lot of overlap. And about release management, I mean, sometimes release management is a highly organized process with a team of people handling everything. Other times, release management's more like a food fight, and it depends on your situation and how big your staff is and what you're trying to accomplish. So, I think sometimes it comes down to a food fight if you're trying to re-architect an org and make a lot of changes. In that situation, it doesn't matter who did it or what the intermediate steps are. It just matters
what are they
what's the
throwing back and
beginning,
forth in
what's
this
the
food
end.
fight? What are they throwing back and forth in this food fight?
Well, so if you're trying to rapidly re-architect an org,
Yeah.
having to route it through Git and merging promotion branches and all of that is a huge
Ooh,
waste of time.
I agree on that for sure. In
So
fact,
it depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you're doing. I think release management is an intermediate case. And you listed your list of 7 DevOps companies. I'm so glad we're not in that list because we pivoted. We saw DevOps Center coming and we pivoted out of the space to an adjacent space. And it's been a great decision because the org management is absolutely vital, especially now with so many customers, coming up on the 10-year mark of their Salesforce investment. It's absolutely vital to have that org running correctly.
that's funny.
Let me
So go ahead.
well let me ask you a question, Vernon. What do you
Mhm.
think about Git? The
Oh,
use of Git and the big dependency that DevOps tools seem to have related to Git, although the relationship's kind of different for each of them.
yeah, I think I've got strong opinions on this. I think the way that I recently have switched to using DevOps Center myself for doing small changes in the enterprise org that I own and run my other business in. And I noticed that when using GitHub in that environment, so the way I did it was I created a sandbox and populated the data in the sandbox and created the sandbox with the source code tracking feature turned on. So the way I did that development pipeline was I was able to do the changes and the tests in the sandbox, and then I was able to um, take that sandbox and uh, extract the data out of it, kind of like an SFDX poll in a way, and then it puts that data that it collected out of the Scratch org into GitHub. And to me, and then I was able to then go to the next step in DevOps Center and deploy the thing in my production org. And that's great. And I realized the whole time I never had to look at GitHub because I had the simplest use case. And in this case, I realized that what I was using GitHub for was as an artifact repository, not really a source of truth or a source code repository or anything like that. And I think also there's actually been a kind of a disservice or a wrong message coming out of the SFDX project, essentially from the very beginning, that this idea of having source code was conveyed as having a source of truth about your org. And that's just wrong. I mean, the fact, first of all, it's almost impossible to collect all of the XML data, all the metadata, everything out of the org using SFDX or using tools outside of things like Metazoa, and then reproduce that later on with a new org or into a Scratch org. You can't do it. If you have a complex org, there's some sort of promise out there that if you have your source of truth, you'll be able to reproduce it. Well, I tried it several times. I gave up. The last time I tried was about a year or two ago. So I understand it's better now. So we have better metadata coverage. Um, Experiences at least has a little bit of coverage now. But it's still not true that if you have a complex org, you can pull the whole thing into Git. So this thing about having source of truth in a Salesforce source code system is not true. It's a lie. And it's, for people listening, please don't try to do that. Please don't try to pull all your metadata down yourself and then reproduce it into the Scratch org or reproduce it into a new target enterprise org or something. You're there will be a lot of tears and a lot of wasted time, and you'll go, what? This thing doesn't work. But what does work, though, is to use Git as an artifact repository. So we just pull little bits according to, I think you guys call it a release boundary or a change boundary within the, whatever it is
Yeah,
I'm changing,
deployment boundary.
deployment boundary. So I just pull everything from that deployment boundary, stick that into the Git thing, just as a convenient file system, really. And then I can pull that out later to do the deployment. So that's where I'm kind of like on a mission now to refer to these things as artifact repositories and not call them source code repositories or source of truth, because that, like I said, is sending people down the wrong path. How's that?
Yeah, gosh, well, we're supposed to be having a debate, but unfortunately, I agreed with every word of that. If you remember where Git
that's
came
not
from,
DevOps gospel. I'm a little contrarian on that.
well, yeah, no, that's a contrarian opinion, but I share it. If you remember where Git came from, Git was developed by Linus Torvalds to accept open source submissions to the Linux kernel in C.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, you can figure out two things. One is Git is not simple and easy to use. It's a very sophisticated system. Secondly, Git is very good at code merge. So I'm kind of keep coming back to that as what I see the fundamental justification for using Git would be. Git's not good with XML. It's double not good with Salesforce XML. It's not good with large XML documents. It just wasn't designed for any of that. And but I agree with your use of the idea of using Git for a repository. We have great support for Git because we feel like we have to, but I think the best repository for your artifacts is that local hard disk. That's where that's the low cost, most expansive place you could put it. And so there's some advantages to it being a client product because that's what we use.
Well, then I still think that, I put everything in the cloud anyways nowadays. So I think to put that stuff in the cloud makes sense, especially for group work. And it's a bit for people listening, by the way, you really, if you haven't figured out Git by now, you do need to spend some time on it, and at least have that org, set up a company account on GitHub itself. And I think that's base level training for most people. Although I have a confession that I hate to use Git command line. So I always use VS Code or the Git GUI whenever I have to use it. So it is truly one of the most obscure and oldest and most Linuxy, and it's just the kind of thing that makes people afraid of the command line, honestly.
Well, I mean, there's a political dimension to this, which is that Salesforce wants their platform to be like other enterprise systems, like Java, developing enterprise software. And so the whole thing about putting in Git, and that's the source of truth. And we have customers who come to us and say, we finally did it. We put our entire org in Git. And I say, great. Why'd you do it? And they don't always have a good answer. Now what?
Yeah, now what? Oh, we have to maintain it. Oh, I got a person dedicated on that. He's got the whole black magic in his head on how to unravel that thing. I mean, I think you guys have kind of capitulated on the need to do lots of deployments, iterative deployments, in order to get through some of these problems. I think DevOps, this is where DevOps is different. I think that we're trying to architect our ways out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're doing, say, an org split or merger, you can't move the assets one at a time from the source to the destination org because of all the related assets in the dependencies and the deployment boundary. But you can't move them all together either. Because there's secondary errors associated with many of the assets, and you have to resolve all the errors to move anything. And so these are really profound problems and really different uses of deployment technology instead of DevOps. I'll give you another example. Our technical debt reduction tools let you find assets that have technical debt, and then you can click a button and go directly into the deployment interface and remove them. So that's a totally different usage of, of deployment technology. And I think that's really cool. Let me ask you something, Vernon. What do you
Mhm.
see as the big challenges for DevOps in the next 5 years?
Well, for me, the reason why I got involved in Salesforce DevOps is because I was a practitioner in cloud native DevOps and Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that the source code and the deployment issues were getting to be solved problems in that world, and they had kind of advanced onto actually figuring out through technical means whether the work that you're doing in development is linked to enterprise value. So I think you mentioned one of the things that you're worried about Salesforce right now is this excuse me is this accumulation of technical debt, and that's kind of like a little bit of an existential issue for the company. Doesn't certainly isn't talked about on CNBC, but I think that there are a lot of these orgs are being discarded and redone, and the whole technical debt thing is an existential issue. I think also the lack of advanced DevOps methodologies such as application lifecycle management and value stream management is another threat to Salesforce as well. So if we don't figure out how to prove to company stakeholders that Salesforce is actually helping with the mission of the enterprise, and that we can tie that tangibly to the work that developers are doing, I think that ultimately people are going to be looking at these investments and wondering if they're actually helping their companies. So I think the future of DevOps really is to try to get release management under control and as a solved problem, which it's not yet, but to then extract metrics out of that development activity, like how quickly are we able to deliver on a specified product? What's the time to delivery for that type of thing? Um, and and have that tied into enterprise value streams, meaning that if I'm at Toyota and I'm building cars, it's, how many cars am I putting out? If I am the Red Cross, how many people am I helping? If I'm a giant company and my employees hate working there, what am I doing to my employee NPS score? Um, through technology, if people are saying, "Oh, I can do better communications," that's going to make the company feel better. Well, we got to measure that, and I think we're not there yet in terms of tying DevOps and SRE and platform engineering and all the variations of it to enterprise performance. I think this is the real challenge right now. And in cloud native DevOps, you've got companies like Digital.ai and others that have been on this mission for a good 5 or 6 years now. So I think we've got a couple of those companies I mentioned earlier do value stream and think about this. But when I talk to them, their customers are still really focused on the release management process
So,
and branch-based development and things like that.
so that what you're saying is really interesting, because one way to look at DevOps is this is a better way to customize Salesforce, and you need to maintain your Salesforce instance and new apps and so forth. But a different view of DevOps is this is how Salesforce competes with the broader cloud players, including Amazon and Microsoft and Google. And what's the future of that? And how does the Salesforce platform compete? And what's interesting to me is, Salesforce is more than a database. There's a bunch of databases out there. Salesforce is more than a programming language. There's a bunch of programming languages out there. And Salesforce has some unique capabilities with platform synergy that no one else has. And one of the big ones I would point to, because the other platforms have plenty of developers and plenty of databases and plenty of code, what they don't have are admins. And I think that is just a key part of the Salesforce platform. And they do emphasize it. The development of flows and all this new stuff is just great. But if I'm thinking I was going to, if I'm Salesforce and I want to compete with the cloud players out there, I would be thinking about admins.
Well, they have, and I think the Trailblazer community is a real force. You know that just walking around Dreamforce and talking to people, also on the LinkedIn and all of the various communities that we're part of. I think Salesforce has delivered on that promise that some people with the right kind of skills can kind of change their lifestyle by becoming a Salesforce admin or becoming part of the Trailblazer community. And it's there's it's usually welcoming. I find that some of that has been tested lately. There was some talk about that around Dreamforce, that we're not quite as community oriented as we should be, and maybe with these layoffs happening at the company, we're looking at a slightly new reality. But I think that is true. The strength of Salesforce moving forward, and for everybody out there, is that there is a large community. There's a lot of users who need help, and they're always hiring still. So I think that they have that. But I also think that if folks like digital.ai can say, okay, well, we can help you use Go and JavaScript and React and things like that, and we can put instrumentation into your JavaScript apps and know what your users are doing, understand the path that people are clicking on the screen. I mean, these are all things that we can't do in Salesforce. So I think right now there's limited observability, limited metrics of the end user. So I think there is a competitive field, like you said, between the hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, and the platforms that they provide with all of the myriad of services that developers at corporations are building apps on right now, versus Salesforce. And in that other app world, they have real DevOps, meaning that you can truly have a source code to build a system from. You don't have to pick it out of a live system. And I think that's actually, to get back to maybe where DevOps went astray in the beginning, is back in, let's say, was it 18 when Salesforce DX was introduced? I think that they really were trying to do exactly what you said, trying to position themselves up against traditional developers and traditional development methodologies. And here we are 6 years later, 5 years later, and it didn't work really. I think that we still have all this complexity, and we still have a lot of focus on release management still. And I it's going to continue. And I think that right now, if we're looking at a lull in Salesforce integration and development because of some of the teams they've targeted for layoffs, it might be a while more. I think we're going to need products like Metazoa and the other 7 that I mentioned more as time goes on.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Well, this has really been a great discussion. Do you have any events or things coming up?
Well, there's always the website, salesforcedevops.net. And on that, I would love for people to come visit and sign up for the mailing list. And I'm developing an online course right now on Salesforce DevOps. And so you can stay tuned to my YouTube channel and other places like that to get a preview of that. And I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so people can always get me there.
Okay, great. And we've got a webinar coming up on org splits and merges, don't we, Jill?
Yep, February 8th. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining. See you next time.